The great ships of the Galactic Council moved through space like silver clouds. They had done this same thing 1,000 times before. Find a new world, show their power. Watch the people surrender. It was always the same. High Counselor Dex Moore stood in the command center of his flagship. His crystal body sparkled blue and green as he looked at the small planet ahead, the third planet from a yellow star. The locals called it Earth. Another primitive world, said his aide, Kethvar. The tall alien had 4 golden eyes that never seemed to blink. They have not even reached their nearest moon with their own ships. Dexmore nodded. In 3,000 years, the Council had never met a species that did not bow down when they saw the Council's power. Some took longer than others, but they all gave up in the end. It was the natural way of things. The strong ruled. The weak obeyed. Send the standard message, Exmoor ordered. Tell them to surrender their weapons and join the Council. If they agree, we will be kind. If not, he did not need to finish. Everyone knew what happened to worlds that said no down on Earth. A message came through every radio, television, and computer screen at the same time. The voice spoke in perfect English, though no human had taught it the language. People of Earth, the voice said, we are the Galactic Council. We rule over 1,200 worlds. You will surrender your weapons and accept our rule. You have 1 day to decide. In a military base in Colorado, General Jake Murphy stared at the screen. He was a big man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had fought in 3 wars, but nothing like this. Sir, what are your orders? Asked Colonel Amy Foster. She was younger than Murphy, with short brown hair and a voice that never shook, even when she was scared. Murphy looked around the room at his officers. These were good people, brave people. They had sworn to protect their country, their families, their way of life. Get me the president, Murphy said, and start moving our people to safe places. I don't think we're going to surrender. In New York, Dr. Helen Chung watched the alien message from her apartment. She was a scientist who studied life on other planets. She had always hoped to meet aliens someday. Just not like this. Her phone rang. It was her brother Ryan, who lived in California. Helen, are you seeing this? Ryan asked. His voice was shaking. Yes, she said. I'm seeing it. What do we do? Helen looked out her window at the city. Millions of people were going about their lives, not knowing that everything was about to change. We do what humans have always done, she said. We figure it out as we go. Up in space, the Council ships waited. They had sent the same message to 1,200 worlds before this one. Usually, the answer came back in a few hours. Sometimes it took a day, but it always came. Ambassador Kethvar watched the small blue planet turn slowly below them. There. Governments are meeting, he reported. They seemed confused. This was normal. Most primitive species needed time to understand how hopeless their situation was. The Council had weapons that could turn whole continents to glass. They had shields that could stop any attack. They had done this so many times that it was boring. How long until they surrender? Asked Captain Quinzek, the ship's military commander. He was from a race that looked like giant insects, but he had been part of the Council for so long that he thought like them. The usual time, Kethvar said, maybe less. They are very primitive. But down on Earth, something different was happening. In the White House, the president sat with his advisors. The room was quiet except for the sound of papers rustling. What are our options? The president asked. Secretary of Defense Patricia Wells spoke first. We could try to fight, but their technology is far beyond ours. Our best weapons would be like throwing rocks at a tank. So we surrender? Asked the president. General Murphy's voice came through the speakerphone. "Sir, I've been a soldier for 30 years. I've seen what happens when good people give up without a fight. Maybe we can't win, but maybe we can show them that some things are worth fighting for." The president was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, he could see people walking on the street. Normal people living normal lives. People who had never asked to be part of a galactic war. "General Murphy," the president said finally, "do what you think is right." Murphy smiled for the first time in hours. "Yes, sir." Around the world, the same conversation was happening in different languages. In London, Paris, Tokyo, Moscow, and hundreds of other cities, leaders were making the same choice. Not because they thought they could win, but because some things were more important than winning. The day passed slowly. On the council ships, the aliens waited. They had waited before. They knew how this worked. But as the sun set on Earth, something happened that had not happened in 3,000 years. Instead of a message of surrender, the council received something else. The message came from a man standing in front of a simple blue flag with white stars. He was not young, and his hair was gray, but his voice was strong. To the Galactic Council, President Charles Adams said, "We have heard your message. We understand your power. We know we cannot match your weapons or your ships. But we will not surrender. We will not give up our freedom. We will not bow down to anyone who demands it. If you want our world, you will have to take it." On the flagship, Vexmore stared at the screen. His crystal form flickered with confusion. This had never happened before. Not once in 3,000 years. "They said no," Kethvar whispered. "They actually said no." "That's impossible," Captain Quinzek said. "They must not understand. Show them what our weapons can do." Vexmore nodded slowly. Sometimes the primitive species needed a demonstration. They would destroy one of Earth's cities. Then the humans would understand and surrender like all the others. "Target their largest population center," he ordered. But down on Earth, Jake Murphy was ready. He had spent the day moving people out of the big cities. Not everyone could be saved, but he would. Save who he could. "All units, this is command," he said into his radio. "They're coming. Remember, we're not trying to win a war we can't win. We're trying to show them what it means to be human." In New York, Helen Chang helped move children out of schools. In Los Angeles, Ryan Carter organized supplies for people hiding in the mountains. In Chicago, Lisa Brooks set up communication networks in the subway tunnels. All across Earth, ordinary people were doing extraordinary things. Not because they thought they would win, but because they refused to quit. The Council had weapons that could destroy planets. They had technology beyond human understanding. They had conquered 1,200 worlds without breaking a sweat, but they had never fought humans before. And humans were different. Humans were the species that looked at impossible odds and said, "So what?" Humans were the children of people who had fought impossible battles throughout history. People who had stood against tyrants and bullies and monsters, even when they knew they would probably lose. The Council thought they were fighting for another planet to add to their empire. But the humans knew they were fighting for something much more important. They were fighting to stay human. As the alien ships moved into position above Earth cities, Jake Murphy spoke one more time to his people. "Today we show the galaxy something they've forgotten," he said. "We show them what courage looks like." The war was about to begin. And for the first time in 3,000 years, the Galactic Council was about to learn what it meant to fight people who refused to be conquered. The first attack came at sunrise. The alien ships dropped from the sky like silver tears, their weapons turning the morning light into fire. Chicago was their target, chosen because it was big and would send a message to the rest of the world. But Jake Murphy had spent the night moving people. When the beams of light came down from space, They found empty buildings instead of millions of people. The aliens destroyed concrete and steel, but most of the humans were already gone, not in the muss. Tunnels beneath the city. Lisa Brooks watched the ceiling shake as the attack continued above. Dust fell like snow, and the lights flickered, but the tunnels held. Around her, families huddled together in the darkness. Children cried softly, while their parents tried to comfort them. "The shaking's stopping," said Tom Wilson, a firefighter who had helped evacuate the city. "I think the first wave is over." Lisa nodded and picked up her radio. "Phoenix Base, this is Underground Command. Chicago Metro is secure. We have about 30,000 civilians safe in the tunnel system." From her command post in the Colorado mountains, Amy Foster felt a wave of relief. "Copy that, Underground Command. Prepare for Phase 2. They'll be sending ground troops next." Amy's command center was hidden inside an old mine shaft. Her team had worked all night setting up computers and communication equipment. They knew the aliens would try to cut off all contact between human forces, so they had built their own network using old emergency radio systems. On the surface, Chicago looked like the end of the world. The tall buildings were gone, replaced by piles of twisted metal and broken glass. Smoke rose from 100 fires, and the air tasted like ash. But hidden in the ruins, Ryan Carter and his squad were waiting. Ryan was 25 years old and had been a Marine for 3 years. He had never expected to fight aliens, but he had adapted quickly. His squad had turned the remains of a shopping mall into a fortress, using broken concrete and twisted metal to build walls and hiding places. "Remember," Ryan told his team, "we're not trying to win. We're trying to make them pay. Every alien we take down is one less that some other city has to face." Through his binoculars, he watched the alien landing craft touch down in what used to be the city center. The doors opened, and creatures in silver armor began pouring out. They looked like humans, but taller and thinner, with pale blue skin. Their weapons glowed with energy that made the air shimmer. "Here they come," whispered Danny Price, Ryan's closest friend and the team's sniper. 50 of them, maybe more. The aliens moved through the ruins like they owned them. They had conquered so many worlds that they expected no real resistance. Their armor could stop any primitive weapon, and their energy guns could cut through steel. They were used to enemies who ran away or surrendered. They were not ready for humans who had decided to die fighting. Ryan's squad let the aliens get close before they opened fire. Their bullets could not hurt the alien armor, but the humans had learned to aim for the joints and the faceplates. When the first alien fell, his squad mates stopped in surprise. This was not supposed to happen. "Now," Ryan shouted. The humans had rigged the ruins with explosives made from fertilizer and fuel oil. When the bombs went off, the street collapsed, taking a dozen aliens with it. The rest scrambled for cover, but they were in the middle of a maze that the humans had built specifically to trap them. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, 47 aliens were dead, and Ryan's squad was down to just him and Danny. Both men were badly wounded, but they were still alive. More importantly, they had shown that the aliens could be hurt. "Phoenix Base," Ryan said into his radio, his voice weak from blood loss. "Chicago Mall is secure. Enemy casualties approximately 50. We are still here." Amy Foster felt tears running down her face as she listened. These were her people, her friends, dying in the ruins of their own city. But they were dying as free humans, not as slaves. "Well done, Chicago Mall," she said. "Help is coming," but help was not coming. There was no help to send. All across the world, small groups of humans were fighting the same impossible battle. In London, police officers were using hunting rifles against alien soldiers. In Tokyo, office workers were throwing gasoline bombs from tall buildings. In Sydney, Surfers were using their boats to attack alien ships from the water dot. None of them expected to win. All of them kept fighting anyway. On the alien flagship, High Counselor Vex Moore stared at the casualty reports with growing confusion. His crystal form flickered between blue and red, showing his inner turmoil. "How many dead?" he asked Captain Quinzek. 237 in the first day, the insect-like captain replied. "The humans are using primitive weapons, but they are fighting like they have nothing to lose." "They do have nothing to lose," said Ambassador Cathvar. "We told them we would conquer their world. They are simply choosing how to die." Vex Moore had never heard of such a thing. In 3,000 years of conquest, the Council had lost maybe a dozen soldiers total. Species that could not win simply surrendered. That was how the universe worked. "Send more troops," he ordered. "Crush this resistance quickly." But the resistance was not something that could be crushed quickly. It was everywhere and nowhere. When the aliens attacked one group of humans, 3 more groups would attack them from different directions. When they destroyed a human base, the humans would simply build a new one somewhere else. Dr. Helen Chong had left New York before the attack and was now in the Appalachian Mountains, helping to coordinate the resistance. She was not a soldier, but she understood how the aliens thought. They were used to fighting other advanced civilizations that fought like them, with big armies and fancy weapons. "They don't understand guerrilla warfare," she explained to a group of resistance leaders. "They expect us to meet them in open battle. Instead, we hit them and disappear. We make them afraid to leave their ships." In California, her brother Ryan was doing exactly that. He had organized a group of civilian volunteers into a mobile strike force that moved through the mountains, attacking alien patrols and supply lines. They used hunting rifles, farming explosives, and pure determination. "We don't have to kill all of them," Ryan told his people. "We just have to make them remember that conquering people is not free. Every world they take should cost them something." The strategy was working. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Galactic Council was losing soldiers to primitive weapons. Their casualties were still small compared to human losses, but they were not used to losing anyone at all. More importantly, word was starting to spread. A council controlled communication across the galaxy, but they could not stop their own soldiers from talking. Stories of the fierce human resistance began to reach other worlds, other species that had given up fighting long ago. On the prison world of Kepler 442b, a Zelani named Vex Thor listened to his guard's stories about the war on Earth. The guard was complaining about how the humans refused to behave properly, how they kept fighting even when it was hopeless. Vex Thor remembered his grandfather's stories about the old days, when his people had been warriors, before the council came, before they learned that resistance was futile. Maybe, he thought, resistance was not about winning. Maybe it was about remembering who you used to be. As the second day of the war began, Jake Murphy stood in the ruins of what had been Denver. The city was gone, but the people were still alive, still fighting. All around him, ordinary humans were doing extraordinary things, not because they thought they would win, but because they refused to lose themselves. "They think this is about conquest," Murphy said to Amy Foster over the radio. "They don't understand. This is about showing the galaxy what humans are made of. The aliens had the better weapons, the better ships, the better technology. But they had forgotten something that humans had never forgotten. They had forgotten what it meant to fight for something worth dying for. And now, for the first time in 3,000 years, they were about to remember." 3 weeks into the war, something strange began happening across the galaxy. On worlds that had not seen rebellion in centuries, people were starting to whisper about the small blue planet where courage still lived. On the mining world of Proxima, Centauri B. Vex Thor worked in the crystal caves as he had for 20 years. His people, the Zelani, had been among the first to surrender to the council. They had traded their freedom for safety, their pride for comfortable slavery. But today was different. Hidden in his work clothes was a small communication device he had stolen from a council overseer. Through it, he could hear the forbidden broadcasts from Earth. The voice belonged to Jake Murphy, speaking from somewhere in the ruins of the American West. "This is Free Earth Radio," Murphy said, his words crackling through space. "Day 21 of the war. We're still here. We're still fighting. And we're still free." Murphy's voice was tired, but it never broke. To anyone listening out there in the galaxy, remember this. Freedom is not something someone gives you. It's something you take for yourself. Vex Thor felt something stir inside him that had been sleeping for generations. It was the same feeling his grandfather had described in the old stories, before the council came, before his people learned to bow their heads and accept whatever they were given. Around him, other Zelani workers had stopped digging. They were listening too, their golden eyes wide with an emotion they had almost forgotten. Hope got back on Earth. The war had changed. The council had sent more ships, more soldiers, more weapons. They controlled the major cities now, but they were learning that controlling cities was not the same as controlling people. In the mountains of Colorado, Dr. Nathan Wells worked in a hidden laboratory carved out of solid rock. Before the war, he had been a physics professor who taught students about the basic laws of the universe. Now he was something else entirely. He was the man trying to find a way to fight gods with sticks and stones. "The power cores are the key," Wells explained to Amy Foster, who had come to see his work. Around them, the cave was filled with captured alien equipment. "Their technology is so advanced that they've made it complicated. We can't build weapons like theirs, but we can make theirs stop working." Amy looked at the pile of alien devices. "How?" Wells smiled for the first time in weeks. "By remembering that sometimes the simple solution is the best solution. Their power cores run on quantum energy. Very fancy, very complex. But quantum energy doesn't like certain radio frequencies. The right signal can make their weapons explode in their hands." It was a small victory, but it was victory nonetheless. For the first time since the war began, humans had found a way to turn the aliens' own technology against them. Meanwhile, Colonel Jake Murphy had been captured during a raid on an alien supply base. The council thought they had won a great prize. They planned to interrogate him, to break him, to use him as an example of human weakness. They did not understand that they had just given Murphy the greatest weapon of all, a platform to speak. To the Galaxy Dot, the interrogation room was deep inside the council's main ship. Murphy sat chained to a chair while Captain Quinzek paced back and forth in front of him. The insect-like alien's translator made his words sound cold and mechanical. "Why do you continue this hopeless fight?" Quinzek demanded. "Your cities are destroyed. Your armies are scattered. Your people are dying for nothing." Murphy looked up at his captor with calm eyes. "We're not dying for nothing. We're dying for the most important thing in the universe. What could be more important than life itself? The right to live that life as a free being." Quinzek had heard this kind of talk before, but only in the ancient records. The old species used to say things like this, before they learned better, before they accepted that the strong ruled and the weak obeyed. "Freedom is an illusion," Quinzek said. "There is only order and chaos. The council brings order." Murphy smiled. "The council brings slavery. And you know what's funny? I think you know it too. I think somewhere inside that shell of yours. Remember what it was like to be free." The interrogation was being broadcast across the council's communication network. It was meant to be propaganda, to show other worlds what happened to those who resisted. But instead, it was having the opposite effect. On world after world, beings who had not thought about freedom in centuries were hearing a human refuse to break under torture. They saw a man who would rather die and surrender his dignity. And they began to remember things they thought they had forgotten. On the water world of Delta Pavonis, the Aquarians worked in the Council's underwater mining facilities. They had been slaves for so long that most of them did not remember what the word rebellion meant. But when they heard Murphy's words, something ancient stirred in their collective memory. Elder Blue Keth was over 300 years old. She remembered the stories her grandmother had told about the time before the Council, when her people had been free to swim in all the oceans of their world. "He speaks truth," she whispered to the younger Aquarians. "Freedom is not given. It is taken." The same conversation was happening on dozens of worlds. The crystalline Cephani remembered the songs their ancestors had sung about heroes. The plant-like Verdani recalled the stories of their warrior gardeners. Even the mechanical Centauri began to question whether their programming to obey was truly unbreakable. On Earth, the resistance had evolved into something the Council had never encountered before. Instead of trying to fight like a regular army, the humans had learned to fight like water, flowing around obstacles, finding the weak spots, always moving. Ryan Carter now led a group of 200 fighters in the ruins of Chicago. They lived in the subway tunnels and the basements of destroyed buildings. They ate food they grew in hidden gardens and wore clothes they made from salvaged materials. They had become ghosts in their own city. "The aliens control the surface," Carter explained to his newest recruits. "But we control everything underneath. Every time they step outside their bases, we're watching. Every time they try to build something, we tear it down." His sister Helen had become something like a traveling teacher, moving from one resistance cell to another, sharing knowledge and keeping hope alive. She carried with her a small radio that could pick up broadcasts from other worlds. "It's starting," she told a group of fighters hiding in the Appalachian Mountains. "Other species are beginning to fight back. The Zelani have started sabotaging mining equipment. The Aquarians are flooding Council facilities. Even the Etherians are using their mind powers to confuse alien troops." The news spread through the human resistance network like electricity. They were no longer alone. Their sacrifice was not just about Earth anymore. It was about reminding the entire galaxy what it meant to be free. But with hope came danger. The Council was beginning to realize that the human resistance was more than just a local problem. It was becoming a threat to their entire empire. High Counselor Dexmore had called for reinforcements from across the galaxy. "We will crush this rebellion," he declared to his war council. "We will destroy every human city, every human base, every human life if necessary." The galaxy must be reminded that resistance is futile. But in the depths of space, something was happening that Dexmore could not see. On the prison ships that carried rebels from a dozen worlds, the prisoners were talking. On the factory worlds, where slave species built Council weapons, the workers were listening to hidden radios. On the pleasure worlds where the Council's elite lived in luxury, even the servants were beginning to whisper about the humans who would not kneel. Shake. Murphy's words echoed across the galaxy. "Freedom is not something someone gives you. It's something you take for yourself." And for the first time in 3,000 years, beings across the galaxy were starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could take it back. The war for Earth was becoming something much bigger. It was becoming a war for the soul of the galaxy itself. The rebellion began on a Tuesday. On Proxima Centauri b, Vexthor had spent weeks secretly talking to other Zelani workers. They met in the deepest parts of the crystal mines, where the Council's listening devices could not reach. The golden-eyed beings spoke in whispers about things their grandparents had told them, about the time before the Council came. "My grandfather used to say that Zelani blood runs hot when it needs to," Vexthor told the group. "Maybe it's time to find out if that's still true." The signal came from Earth. Dr. Nathan Wells had finally perfected his quantum disruptor. When the device activated, every council weapon on the planet stopped working for exactly 30 seconds. It was not much time, but it was enough. Across the galaxy, hidden resistance cells had been waiting for that signal. When it came, everything changed at once. On Proxima Centauri b, the Zelani workers dropped their mining tools and picked up rocks. For the first time in 800 years, they fought back. The council overseers, caught without their energy weapons, found themselves facing beings whose ancestors had been warriors before they became slaves. Vexthor felt something wild and ancient surge through his body as he tackled the council guard. This was what his grandfather had meant. This was what it felt like to be free. On the water world of Delta Pavonis, Elder Blue Keth led her people in flooding the underwater mining stations. The Aquarians could breathe water and swim faster than any council soldier. When their captors' weapons stopped working, the blue-skinned beings showed them what 3 centuries of suppressed anger looked like. The humans taught us to remember, Blue Keth said as she watched council ships flee from her world. Now we teach the galaxy to fight. Even on the peaceful world of Alpha Centauri, the Etherians began to act. These beings looked like tall, thin humans made of silver light. They had been slaves for so long that most species had forgotten they existed. But the Etherians remembered everything, and they had been waiting. When the council weapons failed, the Etherians used their mind powers to turn the aliens' own thoughts against them. Council soldiers found themselves paralyzed by fear they could not understand, haunted by nightmares of their own making. "We have been silent too long," said Elder Lux May, her silver form glowing brighter than it had in centuries. "The humans showed us that silence is not peace. It is just another kind of death." The council's response was swift and brutal. High Counselor Thex Moore ordered his fleets to destroy any world that showed signs of rebellion. If they could not rule through fear, they would rule through terror. The planet Kepler 186f was the first to burn. Home to the peaceful Verdani, a plant-like species that had never raised a weapon. The world was turned to ash in a single day. The message was clear. This is what happens to those who remember how to fight. But instead of stopping the rebellion, the destruction of Kepler 186f made it spread faster. Across the galaxy, species that had been considering resistance saw what the Council was willing to do to maintain power. They realized that the choice was not between slavery and death. The choice was between dying on their knees or dying on their feet. On Earth, the news of the galactic uprising reached the human resistance through intercepted Council communications. Amy Foster stood in her mountain command center, listening to reports of rebellion from dozens of worlds. "It's working," she whispered to herself. "Dear God, it's actually working." But the cost was terrible. The Council's retaliation against the rebel worlds was beyond anything humans had imagined. Entire civilizations were being wiped out for the crime of wanting to be free. Ryan Carter received the news while hiding in the ruins of Chicago. His small band of fighters had grown into something like an underground city, complete with schools for the children and workshops where they built weapons from scrap metal. "The Verdani are gone," he told his sister Helen over their secure radio. "Link, the Council burned their whole world. 3 billion people dead because they listened to us." Helen was quiet for a long moment. She was somewhere in the Rocky Mountains, coordinating supply lines for resistance cells across North America. The weight of what they had started was almost too much to bear. "They didn't die because they listened to us," she said finally. "They died because the Council is evil. And now the whole galaxy knows it." She was right. The Council's massacre of peaceful worlds had torn away the last pretense that they were benevolent rulers. Species that had been neutral were choosing sides, and most of them were not choosing the Council. The mechanical Centauri were among the most surprising rebels. For 1,000 years, they had served the Council as perfect, emotionless soldiers. But Jake Murphy's words about the right to live as a free being had somehow reached even their artificial minds. On the factory world of Wolf 359, the Centauri stopped building Council ships and started building weapons for the rebellion. There, perfect efficiency, once used to serve their masters, was now turned against them. Logic dictates that slavery is inefficient, announced Unit Prime 7 Alpha, the leader of the Centauri rebellion. Free beings produce better results than slaves. Therefore, freedom is the logical choice. Even the Council's own soldiers were beginning to question their orders. The Quillari had been the Council's elite troops for centuries, proud warriors, who believed they served a just cause. But watching their leaders massacre entire worlds for wanting freedom made many of them remember why they had become soldiers in the first place, that Captain Zekthul of the Quillari 3rd Legion stood on the mech bridge of his ship, watching his homeworld burn below. The Council had ordered the attack because some Quillari had been caught listening to human broadcasts. Now millions of his own people were dead. "This is not honor," he said to his second-in-command. "This is not what we swore to protect." That night, Zekthul's entire fleet disappeared from Council space. When they reappeared, they were fighting alongside the rebels, their advanced ships and weapons now serving the cause of freedom. Back on Earth, Jake Murphy had become something like a symbol for the Galactic Rebellion. The Council kept him alive because they hoped to break him, to use his surrender as propaganda. But every day he refused to give in. His legend grew larger. The interrogations continued, BROADCAST, across the galaxy, whether the Council wanted them to or not. The rebels had learned to hack their communication systems, turning their own propaganda against them. "Why do you continue?" Captain Quinzek asked during one session. "Your world is dying. Your people are scattered. What do you hope to achieve?" Murphy looked at his captor with eyes that held no hatred, only pity. "I hope to remind the galaxy what it feels like to stand up. I hope to show them that some things are worth dying for. And I hope that when this is over, free beings across the universe will remember that they don't have to bow to anyone." The words echoed across 100 worlds, translated into 1,000 languages, heard by beings who had almost forgotten what hope sounded like. On Proxima Centauri b, Vex Thor and his people had driven the Council forces off their world entirely. They sent a message to Earth, transmitted in the simple words that were becoming the rebellion's motto: "We are still here. We are still fighting. We are still free." The same message came from dozens of other worlds: the Aquarians, the Etherians, the Centauri, even some of the Quillari. All of them had learned the lesson that humanity had been trying to teach, that freedom was not a gift from the powerful, but a right that belonged to every thinking being. The Council's perfect empire was cracking, and at the center of it all was a small blue world where a species too stubborn to quit had reminded the galaxy what courage looked like. The final battle was coming. But whatever happened next, the universe would never be the same again. The end began with a single decision. Admiral Sandra Hayes had been the highest-ranking human officer to survive the first year of the war. She had commanded the defense of the Pacific Fleet before the aliens destroyed it. She had led the evacuation of San Francisco before the city was turned to glass. And now she sat in chains aboard the Council's flagship, waiting to die. High, Consular Thexmore had planned her execution carefully. It would be broadcast to every world in the galaxy. The death of Earth's greatest military leader would finally show the rebels that resistance was hopeless. But Thexmore had made the same mistake the Council always made. He thought that killing the symbol would kill the idea. He did not understand that some ideas were stronger than the people who carried them. Sandra Hayes stood before the assembled Council on the great platform of Nexus Prime, Around her, beings from across the galaxy watched through screens and communication devices. Some were Council loyalists, hoping to see the human spirit finally broken. Others were rebels, praying for one last moment of inspiration. "Speak your final words," Exmoor commanded, his crystal form flickering with anticipation. Sandra looked out at the cameras that would carry her words across the galaxy. She thought about her daughter back on Earth, probably hiding in some mountain cave with the other survivors. She thought about Jake Murphy, who had died in his cell just days before, never giving the Council the satisfaction of surrender. She thought about all the humans who had chosen to fight and die rather than live as slaves. "You want to know what humans are," Sandra said, her voice clear and strong. "We are the species that stands up when everything else kneels down. We are the children of dreamers and fighters, of people who looked at the impossible and decided to try anyway." The council chamber was silent. Even Exmoor seemed surprised by the strength in her voice. "You can kill me," Sandra continued. "You can kill every human on Earth. You can burn our world to ash and scatter it across space. But you cannot kill what we represent. You cannot destroy the idea that every thinking being has the right to be free." She paused, looking directly into the main camera. "To everyone listening across the galaxy, remember this. We are not fighting because we think we can win. We are fighting because some things are worth fighting for, even when you know you will lose. Freedom is one of those things. Hope is one of those things. The right to stand up and say no to anyone who demands your surrender is one of those things." Exmoor raised his weapon. "Enough words. It is time to die," Sandra smiled. "I'm not dying. I'm joining everyone who ever chose to stand rather than kneel. That's a pretty good group to be part of." The energy beam struck her chest, and Admiral Sandra Hayes fell to the platform. But her words were already racing across the galaxy at the speed of light, reaching every world, every species, every being who still remembered what it meant to dream of freedom. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. On Proxima Centauri, Vexthor listened to the broadcast with tears streaming down his golden face. Around him, thousands of other Zelani stood in silence, their hearts breaking and burning at the same time. "She died for us," whispered Elder Kethsal. "A being from another world, another species, and she died so that we could remember how to live." The silence lasted exactly 1 minute. Then Vexthor raised his voice in the ancient Zelani war cry, a sound that had not been heard for 800 years. Across the planet, millions of his people answered, their voices joining together in a song of rage and hope that shook the ground itself. On the water world of Delta Pavonis, Elder Blue Keth felt the ocean itself respond to Sandra's words. The Aquarians had always believed that water remembered everything, and now the water of their world carried the memory of a human woman who had died for the freedom of beings she had never met. "The current changes," Luketh announced to her. "People, the tide turns. It is time to finish what she started." Even on distant Alpha Centauri, the Etherians felt Sandra's death like a physical blow. These beings of light and thought had experienced every emotion in the galaxy, but they had never felt anything like the combination of grief and determination that now flowed through their collective consciousness. "Her light joins ours," said Elder Lux May, her silver form blazing brighter than a star. "And together we will burn away the darkness." The final battle began not with weapons, but with the simple act of standing up. Across the galaxy, beings who had been slaves for centuries, for millennia, rose from their knees and refused to bow down again. The Council's response was everything they had left. Every ship, every soldier, every weapon was deployed to crush the rebellion once and for all. If they could not rule through fear, they would rule through extinction. But something had changed in the galaxy. The rebels were no longer fighting as separate species with separate goals. They were fighting as one people, united by the simple belief that freedom was worth any price. On Earth, the survivors watched alien ships fill the sky like a metal storm. There were thousands of them, more than enough to turn the planet into a lifeless rock. In hidden bunkers and mountain caves, the last humans prepared for the end. Amy Foster stood in her command center, surrounded by the children and grandparents who had survived the war. They had no weapons that could hurt the alien fleet. They had no ships to escape in. All they had was the knowledge that they had reminded the galaxy what courage looked like. "This is Free Earth Radio," Amy said into her microphone, broadcasting to anyone who could still hear. "This is our final transmission. To our friends across the galaxy, thank you for remembering how to fight. To our enemies above us, thank you for reminding us why we fight. And to the future, wherever it may be, remember that once there was a species called humanity, and we never surrendered. But the end did not come. Instead, the alien fleet found itself surrounded by ships flying the flags of a dozen different species. The Zelani had come, their golden hulls shining like suns. The Aquarians had come, their blue ships moving like schools of fish through space. The Etherians had come, their vessels crackling with silver lightning. Even the Centauri had come, their perfect formations a work of mechanical art. At the center of the rebel fleet flew a ship that made High Counselor Vex Mor's crystal form flicker with disbelief. It was a council dreadnought, one of their most powerful vessels, but it now carried the flag of the rebellion. Captain Zekthel of the Kalari spoke for all of them when he opened communications to the council fleet. "We are here to protect the humans. We are here to end your tyranny. We are here because someone has to stand up to bullies, and today, that someone is us." The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It was not just a fight between ships and weapons. It was a fight between two ideas: the Council's belief that might made right, and the rebels' belief that freedom was worth dying for. When the fighting ended, High Counselor Vex Mor's flagship was burning wreckage drifting through space. Council's fleet was scattered to the stellar winds, their perfect order broken forever. On Earth, Amy Foster walked out of her bunker to see alien ships landing, but these aliens came as friends. Vexthor was the first to step onto human soil, his golden eyes bright with tears. "We came to thank you," he said in careful English. "You reminded us who we used to be. You taught us who we could be again." In the months that followed, the galaxy began to rebuild, not as an empire ruled by fear, but as an alliance built on respect and mutual defense. The Council's former slaves became free peoples, each contributing their own gifts to the common good. Humans, who had expected to die fighting, found themselves welcomed as heroes on worlds they had never seen. But more importantly, they found themselves part of something larger, a community of free beings who had learned that courage was contagious. That hope could spread faster than fear, and that sometimes the smallest voice could change the loudest. Chorus. On the memorial built where Sandra Hayes had died, representatives from every free world gathered to read the words she had spoken in her final moments. The inscription was simple, written in every language spoken by thinking beings. "Some things are worth fighting for, even when you know you will lose." Below that, in smaller letters, was the promise that every free being made to every other. Never again will we forget what valor means. The stars themselves seemed brighter, as if the universe had remembered something important about the nature of courage and the price of freedom. And somewhere in the void between worlds, the spirit of humanity lived on, not in conquest or domination, but in the simple stubborn refusal to kneel before anyone who demanded it.